All right. And we are live on Energy Superheroes. Today we have Dan Caesar, and Dan is the CEO of Fully Charged, and he's an occasional host. I have a little bit of envy because their show has absolutely taken off and done really well in the energy transition space. And they have a really important mission, and that is to talk about technology that helps us stop burning stuff and make a difference for the planet. A critical part of that is that they're able to reach the public in ways that I think are unique that not a lot of shows have been able to. So, Dan, it's really a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Peter, it's great to talk.
Well, Dan, you got to tell us, how is it that you went through this journey? And we talked a little bit about it before we went on, but to become a show in energy transition that actually has an audience is not easy. Tell us how you did it.
Well, I can only take a small fraction of the credit, I'm afraid. I've been in clean energy specifically since 2003, and I've spent a lot of time in solar, batteries, fuel cells, electric cars. And I was not an engineer, I was a communicator. So I spent a lot of time trying to get the word out about these technologies and felt I was quite good at making those messages a bit more simple. But I was doing lots of business to business events. I was meeting with industry stakeholders all the time. And I felt very strongly that there was something missing, which was a way of communicating direct to consumers. And so from my perspective, that became a kind of a frustration, if you like. And then as it happens, I met the founder of the Fully Charged show, an event I was running. And he had set up a YouTube channel in 2010, all about electric vehicles of all shapes and sizes and clean energy too. And he'd done it really well. And I watched it with envy because it was actually a fantastic way of communicating. He didn't talk down to consumers, but he made these, what can be quite complicated topics, really simple. And he had a bit of a head start. He was a TV presenter back in the UK and he was an actor as well. So he was actually in a sci-fi comedy thing called Red Dwarf, which is quite big globally, but really big in the UK. And he played a rubberized robot called Crichton. So he was quite well known and quite a lot of people already were following him on Twitter and they followed him onto this channel. He also used to host something called Scrap Heap Challenge, which was known as Junkyard Wars in the US as well. So he had a bit of a following, and some of that following went to listen to him sort of witter on and talk about electric vehicles. And he built something really interesting. I watched it. I was like, wow, this guy's really good at communicating, really good at making the complex simple, which actually is much harder than people realize. And I met him and I said, way to go. I love what you're doing. This is exactly what we need. How do you make money out of YouTube? And he kind of looked back at me at that point and said, well, if I'm honest, I don't. And he was already producing almost like TV quality episodes, basically every few weeks. He had an audience of about 60, 70,000 subscribers on YouTube. And I said to him, look, I'm really passionate about this. Can I help you? And that's quite often what you hear, I'm sure, when people, start companies, as they start for free, but very quickly I was involved full time. And now 7 years in, I'm still loving it. And we've grown very significantly. We now have an audience on YouTube of about 3 to 5 million views a month, 1 million subscribers. And we've also now have 6 global exhibitions around the world as well, which help us to communicate everything electric vehicle and everything clean energy.
Well, that is really incredible, Dan. So, first of all, I'll give myself a pitch. If you ever need help with investment banking, we'd love to help you because, man, that is an awesome audience to be able to build in this industry, in this niche. I mean, similar to you, I started off as a communicator in the marketing industry and digital media, and then I transitioned to energy in 2009. And I immediately saw exactly what you're talking about. It's so hard to take these complicated subjects and make them relatable. I remember the first meeting I was in with engineers. I understood about one every 10 words, and it's really taken me till now to be able to do the engineer speak and the finance speak in this area. But man, a critical point is the public. You've got to be able to bring the public along to understand this stuff and, talk a little about that and how that has shaped what you guys do in terms of growing your audience and keeping the public interested. How do you guys do that?
I mean, I would give due deference to every engineer I've ever met or worked with, but sometimes they're just burdened with too much knowledge. And I would go into meetings. I've been in meetings, at businesses where we made stuff. And, you would talk about the problems that you were trying to solve. Whereas actually what consumers want to hear about is a positive future quite often. And we felt often when we were listening to stuff about, I don't know, solar batteries, fuel cells, wind turbines, electric cars, those topics weren't really getting a fair crack of the whip. In fact, even to this day, when I watch TV in the UK or I read newspapers in the UK, I still cannot believe how hopelessly out of date and inaccurate those reports I see are on this, our specialist topic. So, from our point of view, one of the things we obviously try and do is stay absolutely on top of what's going on. And it's a really fast moving scene. If you take batteries, for example, lithium ion and the reduced cost of lithium ion batteries and an increased energy density are what has changed the game. Now, there will be other technologies, of course, but that's what changed the game. And that's what Tesla took great advantage of in the last sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 years. That has surprised a lot of people. But actually, in the last year alone, you're seeing a lot more battery chemistry developments now as institutional investment flows into the energy storage and the battery market. Obviously, it's unlocking newer technologies. So now, as well as lithium ion, you're seeing LFP, which is sort of a lithium phosphate ion battery equivalents, which don't have any cobalt in. So that's an interesting kind of development because often that's what's, used to sort of beat the kind of electric vehicle industry with is where are you getting your cobalt from and how ethical is that? So now we have companies like Tesla, more than half of their batteries have LFP. Ford had just announced they're doing a major LFP factory in the US. Rivian have announced that they're only going to use LFP batteries. And we were just getting used to that news, but now we have sodium ion batteries coming out of China, which don't require lithium or cobalt or nickel and are going to be less energy dense, admittedly, but cheaper. And now there's new news about even more sort of high energy density batteries coming out from CATL in China and other stories. And we can barely keep up. So that's us. So we try and keep a finger right on the pulse of what's going on. And then we try as best as possible to make what we're reporting kind of entertaining and where possible, simple. But the watt hour per kilogram measurements that we fascinating, you'd find fascinating. The average consumer, they kind of just want to know, well, how far can I go in this vehicle? How often do I need to recharge it? So I think we are not engineers, so we're not as smart, but we are better at cutting and reducing the acronyms, getting rid of all the numbers maybe, and actually making it a bit more relatable.
No, absolutely. And some of the stuff I've seen from you guys is taking, let's say, a classic car and then converting it over into an electric vehicle. Has that kind of stuff, does that really appeal to the public? I'm sure it does because it gets my attention.
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. And that if you think about it, that's a totally new marketplace. Not only converting classic cars from, to electric, and that makes some people shudder just to think about it, taking out an engine and replacing that with a battery pack. But there's also the ability to convert cheaper cars as well and smaller cars to electric too. So we think there are some nascent industries going to grow out of that. Obviously, they're harder to scale, those types of businesses, but they could be. The whole market is going to be a bit bigger than the cottage industry, I think. I think it's going to be an interesting one to watch. And all I could say for those sort of, classic car aficionados who are going, no, never would I do that to my classic car over my dead body. I've met lots of converters who converted some stunning vehicles and they're all beaming. They're all super happy. The cars have actually got a new lease of life. So we did a conversion with a Ferrari owner and he now uses his car. And before it literally just sat in a garage. He was too scared to use it because it cost him a fortune to run it. And it's actually a bit quicker, a bit lighter. It's going to last a lot longer. So yeah, I mean, you're not going to get the same throaty sound from that, but at the same time, you get to enjoy it for longer. So I would say, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, these things are going to happen. These changes are coming. Why don't we not fight it? Why don't we just enjoy it?
No, it's absolutely right. Classic cars are so amazing and they grab people's attention. I think one of the challenges that EVs have, frankly, and I love Teslas, I see them everywhere, but the design is so boring. It's just like a little bubble. Now some people like it, and I'm sure that people may argue with me on that one, but it's like the modern cars, especially the ones that are electric or efficient, like the new Mustang they came out with. It doesn't look like a Mustang. It's like a bubble. So, and I recognize from a fuel efficiency standpoint, a wind resistance, that design makes a ton of sense. But I think if we could get some EVs that had sort of cooler designs to them, more like the classic cars, even if the range is not quite as, if you lose a little on the range because of aerodynamics, I think that's something that would get the public's attention.
Well, when we first started to do exhibitions 5 years ago, I got every single electric car to the show. But at that point, there was only 10 of them, Peter. So we're running another show in the UK this week, and we will have about 250 different electric vehicles there.
That's
Um,
amazing.
we're expecting there will be 500 on the market by the end of 2025. So there should be something of everything to go around. I actually think that electric cars have kind of kicked car design in the pants and actually, sort of given it an opportunity to refresh. But there's no car in the world that's going to appeal to everyone. It's going to take all different types. So I actually quite like Tesla, but I completely get your point. I was very fortunate to drive the Rivian pickup truck last time I was in California.
The
That's
Rivian is just, it is stunning. It's a stunning vehicle.
yeah, I was very lucky to drive that a couple of hours up the Pacific Coast Highway. That I thought this is work, really. That was a great day for me. I spent time with the Ford F-150 Lightning. There are lots and lots of cool cars coming, and as you say, some older shapes, some that are newer. But I think having the battery pack in the skateboard or in the bottom of the car is actually giving designers some freedom to do things a bit differently. So you're going to see some weird or wonderful stuff, some stuff that, like a Cybertruck, that might appeal to one type of consumer that others will hate. But then you're going to see some other stuff which is a bit more traditional. I mean, the Ford F-150 Lightning doesn't look very different to the gas F-150, to be fair. So I think that choice is obviously going to be a key thing. And until relatively recently, there wasn't really the choice. That's happening really fast now. I think the only thing that we have, about a quarter of our YouTube audience is in America, and we do events in North America as well. But the one sadness for me is that America is almost always at the cutting edge and at the front of these trends. And ironically, you've got the number one electric car company in the world, in America. And that really was a phenomenon that kind of span out of Silicon Valley, really. But America is actually behind the curve on quite a lot of this, it sounds quite odd coming out of my mouth, because normally America, as I say, is a long way ahead. But we spend a lot of time looking at the Chinese electric vehicle market in Scandinavia. I mean, you're probably aware of this, but about 88% of new car sales now in Norway are pure electric. And then in Sweden, it's over 35%. In Germany and the Netherlands, is around 20%. The UK is about 16%. And then the US is on about 6.5%, 7% for 2022. California is about 16%. I think I read the other day that Florida's quite high up there as well. But America is actually a little bit behind the curve. So from our point of view, when we talk to our American audience, they have different reactions. They're more worried about the infrastructure than our audience in Europe, for example. They're more worried about range and the choice of cars because, as I say, we're doing a show in Europe, in Amsterdam, in November. We will have so many cars there, cars that just aren't available yet in the US. So I'm not saying that, Peter, to stoke the fires of the US market, but it is a shame in a way, because actually, as I say, Tesla is, in the electric vehicle world, is still the one to beat.
Yeah. So I'll go a little geeky on you here. It's partially because of the power grid. And the reason is because a lot of people don't know this, but the United States is just a mashup of a bunch of regional power grids. A lot of the countries, they have a national power grid. So if they want to increase their amount of capacity on the grid, very easy to do because they can pass at the national level. Everything in the US is done at the state and local level on the power grid side. So you have states like Texas and California, and they're woefully behind in terms of power grid upgrades. Power grid upgrades. They really do have a grid problem. They're having outages, they're having rolling blackouts, and a lot of that was because of deregulation going back to the early 2000s and the Enron days. Now you look at a state like Florida. Florida stayed on, essentially FPL governs the whole state of Florida pretty much. And so it's a well thought out sort of public market of the terms of the power grid. And as a result, I think Florida is going to be a sleeper in terms of electric vehicle growth. Number one, in terms of the issues around, let's say, torque and things that worry people.
Yeah.
You don't have that problem so much in Florida because it's flat.
Yeah.
It's usually good weather. We don't have big, long commutes for the most part. It tends to be centered around cities. But I think the power grid part in Florida, our utility has already planned upgrades. We have a very efficient, low cost grid. And I think if the United States wants to sort of move quicker, both in EVs and hydrogen, even though the Inflation Reduction Act was a huge leap forward, we
Yeah.
need a lot more. And Economist covered it this month when it said, don't hug trees, and it's got somebody hugging the power
Well,
poles,
I saw that. Yeah.
and I thought that was a great cover and
Yeah.
forward. So we do need a better national and statewide across the states policy in terms of upgrading our power grids.
Well, I think a lot of it's cultural though as well. I mean, I agree. I mean, we've run events in Austin, so we're familiar with ERCOT, run events in San Diego, so we're familiar with the California grid as well. But I think actually the culture is the dog and the infrastructure is the tail. At the end of the day, there is still, if you're not seeing lots of electric vehicles, I mean, I think that America has the most pronounced car culture of any country I've seen in the world. The UK has also got a very strong car culture. So we're not talking about, from a point of view of a lack of understanding, we get it. But Americans particularly like, because of the way cities are laid out, because of the sprawl, etc., because of often heat, but sometimes other more extreme weather conditions, they like to drive. And, there's the public transport in the UK is not great, but it's a smaller country, right? But there's some closeness, there's some proximity. If you want to get around, you might be able to hop on a bike. And I spent plenty of time in Florida, and it's not a place I would cycle a bike. Let's just put it that way. I'd far rather get in the car.
It's
Um,
too humid.
yeah, exactly. And and I think is there a train that runs into Winterpool because from memory, but there's not a lot of train infrastructure and things like that. So logically, in America, it's some way a bit of a harder sell culturally. I think the US will get there, but the irony that Tesla is there, sort of born out of California, and now actually doing a lot of its work in Texas, is not lost on us. And we're very keen. We think Ford have been very progressive, actually. We're hoping that the signs are that GM is going to follow suit. And then you've got some great companies that are incubating there. Like we really hope that Rivian succeed, but they seem to have picked the worst time possible in terms of pandemic and economic issues to launch a new car company. Whereas Tesla was already not mature, but was through that initial manufacturing hell, I think. So yeah, we're big supporters of Rivian. So the US market to us is fascinating, but actually it's where some of the biggest opportunities lie.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And Rivian, I think it's got to survive. I mean, gosh, it's a good looking car, no doubt about it. I want to change a little bit, Dan, and talk about growing a podcast, because
Okay, sure. Yeah.
so many people ask me about it. We have a very small audience. We focus on finance is a niche within a niche, but man, so many people try it and then give up after a few episodes. And it's just something that everybody wants to do. But I would say maybe 1/10 out of 1% of people are even able to get anything off the ground. And then much smaller percentage are able to build an audience like you guys have been able to. So give the viewers some tips on, man, how do you be interesting? And then once you are, how do you grow the audience?
I mean, I think from our perspective, so we have 2 YouTube channels. We do 3 episodes a week. Some of it is television standard. There's a lot of production that goes into that. You can imagine. We didn't start that way, Peter. We started more like once a fortnight, once a week. We
So I
filmed.
can give you a comment on that. When I first started, I said I want it to be awesome television quality, and we shot a
Yeah.
bunch of episodes, and then I had some help with people behind the scenes. I
Yeah.
couldn't get episodes out. It was too hard. I
Yeah.
mean,
I'm not sure it makes a massive difference if I'm completely honest. Like we could throw money at some episodes and they look great and that's, wonderful, but does it really move the needle on numbers? I'm not sure it does. I mean, I think if I was to give you any advice, I know Robert, our founder, would say, you've just got to keep putting it out there, keep putting it out there, but that's the first thing. And he's almost like a battle of wills. You've got to be regular and so keep forcing it out there. It's that determination to make it work. I think the thing I would say is that, find what your kind of independent angle is. We are quite opinionated, quite forthright, and I think there's an edge to that and a jaggedness that attracts certain people. I'm sure it repels others, but we're not afraid to say what we think. We don't think something's right. So I think that's been kind of useful. So for example, and this will go down really badly with your American audience, but we actually don't feel there's actually a strong future for the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. In Norway, for example, that market's almost died away. Everyone's gone eventually to battery electric vehicles. When I talk to American audience, they're still like, no, we need the plug-in hybrids because they solve some of the issues that we've got. Now we can see where the American audience is coming from, but we think technology, it's a bit like iPhone, BlackBerry, or, it's the winners are going to be chosen by the consumers. And typically when people get in the battery electric vehicles, they go, no, these are just better. So we think that's what's going to happen. So we haven't filmed with plug-in hybrids on our channel for years. And we were very early to make that decision, which if you think about it, it's quite a big risk. Because even in America now, people say, oh, no, we like plug-in hybrids. And we're like, I get it. I understand why you do. But when you spend time with a proper pure electric vehicle and maybe some of the infrastructure is a bit stronger, et cetera, it does take time to build it out. I don't think anyone will want to buy a plug-in hybrid in 2035. I really don't think that's going to happen. So we had to choose, I think, Peter, who we were and what we stood for, not just on electric cars, but on all manner of electric transports and on different energy types as well. Where do we stand on nuclear, for example? We are, quite clear on what we stand for. And then the world has to kind of get used to that. But I think the audience respects that and they kind of come back for your kind of unique take on it.
Yeah, and it's really hard to do that, especially when you're in a B2B world, right? Because you're trying to offend anybody. You don't want to lose clients or business over it. But at the same time, when it comes to building an audience, you absolutely have to have that niche that you focus on.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you just have to be very clear what you are. I think I listened to one of your episodes the other day. I thought it was great. You were talking to another English guy. Sorry about all that.
Proportionate number of guests come on this show. You think a disproportionate amount of innovation, excuse me, is coming out of Britain when it comes to this area?
I would be completely honest about Britain. I mean, it's got some challenges at the moment. I think innovation is where we thrive. I think so. Startups, we're very good at that. Innovation, scaling things up, we're terrible at it. Dreadful. So there's a kind of a double-edged sword there, right? We've got some great ideas and we end up exporting them or selling them on. So there's quite a lot of millionaires and billionaires here per capita, but we're not great at scaling them. So it is, as I say, there's two sides to that coin. But yeah, the energy industry in the UK has been quite interesting because it's very deregulated, lots of competitive companies, and that's led to some really innovative solutions.
Now, I'll give a shout out to Lindy, which is a company out of Ireland, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
The innovation has been tremendous on the hydrogen side and in a lot of areas. Others, of course, but in terms of big companies, we see them a lot in deals that we work on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. And actually, I think the UK is probably a bit more innovative than Europe in some ways. And Europe is a bit more old fashioned now. It's got a bit sort of stuck in its ways. Now, you may be aware that we actually sort of severed our political links slightly with Europe, and I was
really, I didn't hear that,
and I definitely wasn't in favor of that, and I'm still not. But I have to say, it's interesting. There's a kind of you can see why this island mentality sort of kicked in, and we were never culturally maybe a good fit, which is a great shame, I think, because I think they bring some of the best attributes to us, and vice versa. But unfortunately, at the moment we've divorced. I mean, there might be a reconciliation one day, I hope, but at the moment we are divorced and we're not really on speaking terms.
Well, I think the currency part was a big item there, and UK, hats off. Probably better to stick with the pound than the euro, but you could go either way on that one. I think the Swiss are happy they stuck with their currency, but that kind of stuff devolves a little into the too esoteric and boring in terms of finance. So I'll stay away from it. But no, on the YouTube channel side, what other tips could you give people in terms of growing YouTube audience? Like you see the show notes.
Yeah.
This number of episodes, 3 weeks is a lot, I think, for somebody to do. And do you have any success on LinkedIn? We see a lot of our audience that is trying to promote LinkedIn. We haven't had much success with video. We've had much better success with written posts on LinkedIn. But any comments around YouTube and LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm very happy to talk about that if you think you're interested, your listeners would be interested. But I mean,
I'm interested. So they have
every platform is different. So we started with a view that whatever we do on YouTube, we'll just replicate that elsewhere. And clearly that was just a dumb idea. It just doesn't work like that. So at the moment on YouTube, if you watch an episode of Fully Charged Show, you're in for 10, 15, 20 minutes of high quality TV standard stuff. But then YouTube is now trying to get people to do shorts as well, really sort of short content, which we can't stand. But we accept that we'll probably have to do that. But because we're probably a bit older, it does not appeal to us. So we're going to employ more young people to do that sort of stuff. And we're on Instagram and we're not on TikTok yet. We're on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think in terms of YouTube, we find the algorithm quite difficult to read, and we've actually had consultants in to help us, and there are probably three things really from our perspective that we would sort of leave behind. One of which is, you know, the choice of who you're talking to or what you're filming is obviously a big thing, right? So I hope this episode does very well for you, but if it doesn't, I won't be offended, because at the end of the day, there might be higher performing episodes that you can choose. So you really got to find those ones that are going to get the biggest kind of view. So your choices at the outset are very important. And then how you package that up. I mean, there are some YouTube thumbnails that we have where there might be a picture of Robert or me or other presenters pulling a sort of funny face. God, I hate doing that sort of stuff, but it does work. So it really is about making sure the thumbnails are very punchy, very sort of high contrast in color, really grabbing people and dragging them in, not too niche in terms of, topics. So there's one of us in a minute, saying, "That's it. What?" Then that will probably work better than a more kind of intellectual one. So that's the reality. And you've got a business audience, so you probably want to dial that down a little bit. A consumer audience, sometimes we have to play that game. And then in episodes, really, YouTube is quite interesting. It's a bit distinct to podcasts because you can see when people are switching off. You can see if you've got an episode where, the audience dips and it goes down, and, do they, lots of people come in and watch the first minute and then go. And that's typical of YouTube. That's not us. It's just typical. And then how do you retain them? And can you see where people have really been, focusing on what you've been doing? So yeah, the pre-choosing stuff, the packaging, and then the post sort of stuff is important as well. In terms of LinkedIn, yeah, we do some stuff on LinkedIn, but video doesn't really work at all. And so what I resort to doing, Peter, is some fairly, contentious, probably the right word, I suppose, some posts that kind of really make people react, I think. Not negative, but really say, actually, this is probably going to die, right? Or, whatever it is, and that's the sort of thing that gets us some traction. So on LinkedIn, we do use it, but we have a company account that gets very few views or followers, and we have my account, which gets a lot more. So I think it's like it has to be an individual level, I think, as well. And yeah, we've had some that have really kind of blown up, but probably when I'm being at my most controversial and saying things like the combustion engine will be dead by 2035, stuff like that. So it depends. We're comfortable doing that sort of stuff if we believe in it, but others might not be. But yeah, LinkedIn, we actually we think it's a lot better than it was, and actually think it's quite a good platform now. I think it was a bit vanilla for many years. I think it was quite good. We were always on there, but weren't really posting that regularly. It was more about just being there and connecting. I think now that opinion piece has actually become quite a big part of LinkedIn.
That's a great tips, and I'm going to implement those in our business. My audience by far is the biggest on LinkedIn in terms of, it's, I don't know, 12,000 people, but to get that audience to engage is very difficult. And it's exactly what you say. Nobody really wants video. The way I use LinkedIn is it's at the end of the day, I'm at home. I've got a little extra time. I'm scrolling through. I'm usually with my fiance, with my significant other, and I don't want to play a video because I don't want to bother. I don't want to create the noise, but I can just get information very quickly on there. I think your point about text, we definitely see text does better than video on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's quite a good it's quite a good platform. Yeah. I mean, I think quite a lot of people have moved there. Twitter has changed a little bit. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with, but there's some
Elon did some things. All right, that's the next topic.
There's some controversy about Twitter at the moment, and certainly I was there very heavily, and I probably spend a tenth of the time there now, and I spend much more time over on LinkedIn. So I don't know their statistics, but I'd imagine they are one of the beneficiaries of the fact that Twitter has changed a little bit.
Yeah, so that's always an interesting topic, right? So you have Elon, and I don't know if people will disagree with me on this, will be controversial, but you have Elon as kind of the hero of electric vehicles. And I think if it wasn't for him, there's no way the market would be as far along as it is. And so from a political standpoint, that could be considered a little bit more on the left, maybe, focus around there. And now with what he's done in Twitter, people are saying he's on the right. I would consider what he's done very libertarian, in terms of just wanting to create a free speech platform. But I'd love to get your take on that, kind of the
Oh,
dichotomy of Elon and EVs
yeah.
versus his new
Oh,
persona on Twitter.
oh, we have views, and I'm very happy to give them to you. I mean, I have to say, I agree completely with your first point. He didn't found Tesla, but he came in and turned it into what it is today.
It's a
They,
juggernaut.
they will make 1.8 to 2 million electric cars in 2023. They are outselling Audi and Mercedes. And I'm talking about gas cars as well. They're outselling them already. They have plans to get to 20 million EVs per annum by 2030. And I think they'll get at least halfway there. I'm actually half glass half full. I think they'll get all the way there. But I think for balance, I think that they are going to be the world's biggest car maker, which is insane because in 2016, when they took the Model 3, they had about a million pre-orders, but the old manufacturers, now you're not going to be able to make them. And then very famously, they got through production hell. They started to make them. They got more credibility. Model Y is now, I think, one of the best selling cars in the world, period. And then, of course, it's not just about the cars, right? It's about the batteries, both residential and commercial. It's about solar. It's about so many other things. It's a vertically integrated supply chain.
Well, to our comments about the grid, if he's helping to solve both sides, chicken and egg, right? So
It's,
I think that's
it's
incredible.
It is already a great book to read, what Elon Musk and Tesla has achieved to this point. But give it another 10, 15 years, the books on what that the business has achieved to be less controversial, not the individual, the business has achieved, a lot of which came through his original foresight and gritty determination. We will go down in legend, I think. So I would say he is a genius from a business point of view with Tesla. But haven't we all been really good at something and then thought, oh, I'm really good at this, and therefore I will also be really good at that? That is, hubris, right? That has befallen men and women since the dawn of time. The Romans, my surname is Caesar, well, we've got Rome. Why don't we go and get France? And then we'll go and get Britain as well. And you stretch too far, you spread too thin. There are things that you don't know about. And of course, he spent a lot of time on Twitter. So clearly was a real enthusiast but had some frustrations about it. So kind of got into this strange, I'll buy it. And then when he found out the truth behind the actual number of users, didn't want to buy it and then had to buy it due to potential lawsuits. He then found himself in a really invidious position, and he came in a bit like a bull in a china shop trying to fix it. And I think in honesty, has made some errors. Politically, it's really interesting to see him be a bit, he definitely isn't left of center on Twitter. His whole ideology around solar and batteries and electric vehicles to this point has been largely a kind of left leaning pursuit, which needs to go across the whole political spectrum. But his views on Twitter are, let's say, they're certainly more centrist, occasionally quite hard left, occasionally quite hard right. So he's probably balanced himself out quite nicely. But there's certain things he's done, like as we speak, the blue tick.
Got to tell me about the blue check mark.
The blue
Very
check
interesting.
mark,
Get your update.
the blue check mark situation has changed. And I have to say, Robert, our founder, because he's quite well known, had a blue check mark from way back in the day. And I've looked at his blue check mark. I thought, yeah, I'd quite like that, and there was a process I had to go through to get it. I had to, be a kind of a quoted person to be verified on Twitter. And I thought that'd be quite interesting. But as soon as he gave it value and you could just buy it, it became meaningless, in my opinion. So now we have a very strange situation that a lot of the people who should have it don't have it. A few people who's paying for, I think they changed the rules and now they're giving it to everyone who's got over 1 million followers. So it just seems like a bit of a mess. I think he probably thought lots of people will buy it and that will help them financially, because I heard an interview he did with the BBC the other day, and he made the BBC interviewer look increasingly stupid during the interview because he was several levels above him intellectually. But you could see that they had no choice. Twitter was going to go under. So he had to take some really drastic steps. So I'm not totally against what he's done, but I think even now, you can get a long way with a smile and doing things a bit more softly. I think he's been a bit too much of a bull in a china shop. So yeah, Tesla genius, Twitter hubris. That's the way I would describe it. So yeah, it's not quite as fun, that platform, anymore, I don't think. It's a bit confused. I hope it continues. I hope it gets better, but I do wonder. Is that
Well,
controversial enough, Peter? Is
no,
that
that was awesome. So I'll make a forecast for you. I think Twitter is going to be wildly successful.
yeah, I hope so. I really hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll say in terms of the blue check mark, essentially it's interesting from a philosophical standpoint. So previously you had the blue check mark. It was essentially like check mark by committee, right? So you had a small group within Twitter that would review it and you could get it or not get it. And there was a lot of complaints. Some people got it, some people didn't
Yeah.
get it. And then now by having people pay, what they can do is they can verify you because you put your credit card in. You have to put in, I think, some other information. So they use the credit card processing network to verify that at least you are the named person that you say you are,
Yeah.
essentially. So that $8 a month gives them revenue, but it also gives them the ability to sort of verify that you're a real person as
Yeah.
opposed to a cat,
And
right?
that was
Like
and that
something.
was the big problem, right? So personally, I would say I really hope it works for them. I really hope it succeeds because I think it's quite an awesome platform actually when it's working well. You can
It's
learn
kind of
so
the
much.
rawest platform because just the way it's architected, it seems very raw compared to the other. The others
Yeah.
they're not as centralized as traditional media, but they're still centralized, whereas that platform seems just very decentralized.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So we spend a lot of time on these social media platforms. And then, you know, we wouldn't be where we are now without YouTube. You know, that's our central platform as a business. As I say, we get millions of views per month, and that's fantastic. And that's testament to what we've done. But I just think it's absolutely bizarre that in 2023, there isn't a mainstream TV streaming program about electric vehicles and clean energy. We find it extraordinary. So we're very grateful to YouTube that we've been able to do that. But our ambitions are beyond YouTube as well as being on it.
absolutely. And where do you think that would come if you had to guess? If you guys were on a major network, who should pick you guys up?
Well, we're very spoiled because we have a global audience already. So about 22% of our audience is in America, 22% in the UK, 22% in sort of Northwestern Europe. And then, you know, we have lots of people in Australia and elsewhere.
Incredible.
So
Global
going
audience.
to a national broadcaster for us is not unappealing, but it's, you can see we would like to be greedy and to play at a level that a Disney or a Netflix or an Apple or an Amazon is at. So, you know, those are the types of the ones we'll be trying to get on, but we already make sort of TV quality production and we know the subject really well. So hopefully we'll be able to pull that off sooner rather than later.
Well, fingers crossed. I watch Netflix. I'm not on too many of the others, so I'll be rooting for you guys to get picked up on Netflix because I would definitely watch
yeah,
it. If
yeah,
it was
no,
there, I would watch it. No doubt.
your words to God's ear. Yeah. If anyone's listening, let us know.
We'll tag Netflix on LinkedIn and we'll tag a couple of the executives and we'll see if we get any play out of it.
Thanks, Pete.
So good stuff. Well, before I go, I got to ask you, what kind of EV do you drive and why is that? What's so good about it?
Well, before I answer that, I'm going to tell you I've had four. I've been driving 7 years. I've done 200,000 miles in 7 years. No problems. I started in a little BMW i3. Have you seen those? I think you must have some of those in Florida.
Absolutely. We've got them all over the place.
Curious looking cars, but amazing to drive. I then had a Hyundai Kona for a little while, which is good as well. And then I got a Tesla Model 3. And I'm my second Tesla Model 3 now. But my wife has an MG4, which is a very good car as well. As I said, I've driven the Rivian, driven lots of different electric cars. All of them are great. I sound like I'm pitching now, but I recommend people go to try them. The Ford Mustang Mach-E. I know people have mixed feelings about the Mustang badge being used in that way, but that's really highly rated as well. So yeah, at the moment I drive a Model 3 and I have to say the thing that puts it above everything else is the supercharging network. So wherever you
Absolutely.
go, I could drive across Europe and I have, and it works
And the
first
speed of the charge.
and the speed as well.
Yeah. And I personally think that's the biggest thing. If you could get people to where you could charge in 15 minutes, even if you had to charge multiple times, I
Yeah.
think that part of it bothers people. But one thing that is missed, I've seen it in our turnpikes, even when the charging is slower, the Gen Z is perfectly happy to sit there and be on their phone for some amount of time because
Yeah.
they like to check their phone. So if they're going to sit there for 25, 30 minutes and check their phone, they're happy to do it.
Yeah. I had someone say to me the other day, well, what if I wanted to do 1,500 miles in 24 hours? And I went back to the guy and said, well, you're like the edgiest of edge cases. You're the
Right.
corner case.
Nobody's going to do
Oh,
that.
that's not. Where are you driving to? London to Athens? Where are you going? So for the most majority of people, as I say, I do 100,000, sort of every sort of 3 years or so, so 30,000 miles a year.
I think that's normal.
And
That might even be above average.
I've never had an issue. So, for me, it's just nothing to worry about. Enjoy it. Go with the flow. Enjoy it. That's how you get the most out of life in general, I find.
No doubt about it. Well, Dan, it's really been a pleasure having you on today. And the show is called Fully Charged. Where can they find you guys? I know you've gone over it a little bit, but specifically, how can people get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, so the Fully Charged show is on YouTube, so you can find us there. We have a second channel called the Everything Electric Show, which is more about home energy technology. That's a huge growth area for us. And then we have Fully Charged live events around the world, including in San Diego in October, in Vancouver in September. And then we also do shows in Australia, the Netherlands, and 3 in the UK as well. So actually the great thing, watching the channel's great. I recommend it, but if you get a chance to come and see some of the cars and see some of the technology when we're over in the States next time, I'd recommend it.
No, and I did want to end, but I have to, now that you said home technologies, I have to ask you about heat. I got to ask you about heat pumps. I'm seeing all this buzz around heat pumps in
Yeah.
the community and elsewhere. Tell us what that is and why it even matters.
Okay, so obviously the heating requirements in Florida are very different to where I am just outside London. So it's April here in the UK as it is there, but you're probably, at 25 degrees or something like that. We're at 10 here in the UK. So it's a long, cold winter here. But even so, the gas boiler or the gas furnace, as you would have it, is kind of going away. There's lots of bans coming in on those kind of types of technologies now, moving past combustion. And so we believe that electrification will be the thing that replaces the gas. Heat pumps are probably going to be the biggest beneficiary of that. There's tons of them in Norway and Sweden already, which are even colder than the UK. They work fine. The grid is fine. The grid hasn't gone down. They've got tons of EVs there as well. The grid hasn't gone down. But heat pumps they basically move energy. They compress and move energy, take the outside energy, and they kind of have a coefficient of performance of 1 unit in. They make it 3 or 4 times more energy, and then they put that into your house. Now, in Florida, you've got the perfect conditions because you've got sunshine. So you can run solar and air conditioning or, solar and heat pumps that heat and cool as well. So we think there's lots of different electrification of heat technologies. It's not just one, but the air source heat pump, as it's known, will take up a big percentage of the market. So if I was in the investment industry, which I'm not, or if I was in the renewables industry and I was an installer, heat pumps is the thing I would get into. I think that the upside there is huge.
You're good to know. Excuse me. And heat pumps will work in Florida.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. So you guys
Yeah.
heard it.
Yeah.
Investment opportunity is heat pumps in Florida. We're going to look into it. It sounds like a great idea. But Dan, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Make sure you check out Fully Charged. These guys know what they're doing, whether you want to learn how to get better at growing your channel or you want to really understand EVs and what's changing in the marketplace. Check out Fully Charged. Dan, thanks for being on.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Peter.